and got it. My name is Taupori Tangaro, and I am with Hawaii Community College, a professor of Hawaiian Studies, and I'm also I work in the university system. It's a 10-campus system, and I contribute to the well-being of things indigenously Hawaiian, including our environment and our leadership development, the well-being of our community. So every day I wake up and I create opportunities for people to share their stories, to share their experiences, to share their advancements, and to share their traumas and how they've turned their traumas into advancement for the well-being of our indigenous realities. I'm in Waiakea, Waina, so the rain is coming. And so blessings to all of you. The rain is coming. Can you hear that? The rain is, okay, wow, that's a lot of blessings to all of you. Mōkaulele is a platform, again, where we look at leadership through the stories of the leaders in our community. So we start here. Now, if you know what growing up in Hawaii is like, oftentimes we're conditioned to think that leadership comes outside of Hawaii. You know, if you went through the public school system, we study all kinds of leaders, and minimally they're from here. Mōkaulele does the reverse. We look at our own native stories and our native people and what they've done, how they've taken their personal lives and make it work for them as they push through, contributing to the well-being of Hawaii through this leadership practice of theirs. It's called, we use a framework we call Ka'au. And the Ka'au is a 5-part framework, and it's, give me a minute, I gotta close some of these windows. I feel like I'm in competition with the rain, and you know I am going to lose if that be the case. Okay, just a minute. Okay, that helped for a little bit. Okay. And so this 5-part Ka'au process is, you know, it exists in the story of Pele and Hi'iaka. And that's a big story for myself and my family and our community, because we live in the environment of Pele and Hi'iaka. And so our lives studying Pele and Hi'iaka, I realized that, you know, there's something here, not just for entertainment, not just for cultural entertainment, not just for historical perspectives, but there gotta be something, you know, and language people love to use these old ka'au because the language is just beautiful, but there's something else. And years of studying it, I realized that, oh, there is a framework for leadership. That Hi'iaka's journey and the whole story of her going to Lohi, you know, getting Lohi out and coming back is not about her fetching her sister's lover. On one level, yes, but on a deeper level, it's a coded message of leadership rising from one station of understanding into another station of understanding, from one station of service to another station of service. So this framework, the first one is Hua. You know, that's the beginning, like Hi'iaka. What was Hi'iaka's beginning? What was her nurturing like that prepared her for this journey? Her ha'alele, what were the factors that launched her into the journey? The ha'alele means to launch. Her huaka'i, what was her journey like going up and you know, up and down the archipelago, her experiences, which is very well detailed in our stories. Her ho'ina, her coming back. Well, how did she integrate her experience back into what she was doing here at home here in Hawaii? She left a juvenile, she came back a deity. So how is that shift integrated into the advancement of her community? And then of course, the ha'ina, You know, and Hi'iaka is known worldwide, you hula people. We hula people, we know Hi'iaka worldwide. We still sing her name, her ha'ina. Her story has become such an emblem for many of us. So using that same framework, we look at leaders in our community and we ask them, what is your hua? What is your, at what point did you ha'alele? What was your huaka'i? What is your, you know, what is your ho'ina? You're coming back, and then your ha'ina. What message do you have for up and coming leaders who may not be encouraged to be a leader, but have this driving need to be one? So this, the reason why we do this, well, the University of Hawaii is committed to growing Indigenous leadership. And so this is, it's not a small initiative, it's a huge initiative. It is what we call, it's a strategic imperative. It's called Hawaii Papo Keʻau, the advancement of Indigenous leadership, culture, and communities, community well-being. And so Mōkaulele advances that. It's in direct alignment to this initiative. And that's why we're here. Presley, Keʻalaanuhea Mook, I met her on a mauna. And I'm gonna save time for her to tell her story. And she's already prepared to tell this story in the format, in the framework of ka'au, the hua, the ha'alele, the huaka'i, the ho'ina, and the ha'ina. And so why don't we call upon Presley? Presley out here, oi. Where are you? Aloha nui. And Presley, can you first of all tell us who you, please start your PowerPoint. Who you, why you?
Okay, I'm gonna follow directions a little bit, but I'm gonna open my PowerPoint when I share who I am. So I'm just gonna share screen real fast, if that's okay. Oh, it's not sharing. Okay, wait, hold on 1 second. You would think that I would have this good to go since I teach, but I don't know what's going on.
That's because you're tying up Elizabeth, the dog.
Yes, I very much was. Okay, let me try. Okay, I gotta re-sign in, it says. I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, so leadership. Let's talk about the leadership and why leadership is an important conversation here in the University of Hawaii. Again, not all, but many families, we went through this, what we call this, this indoctrinating, where we're somehow convinced that leaders come from outside of the family, outside of the community. And when we look at the world around us, let's look at government. Let's look at the leadership there. Let's look at the leadership in the university system. Let's look at leadership anywhere. And you know, because Hawaii is such a diverse community, you think that diversity would be reflected in arenas of leadership. But lo and behold, oftentimes the people that are in leadership or who are making decisions for communities because of their leadership platform, they're not, you know, they're not people like us. And so therefore they have, it's a challenge for them to create, you know, decisions that will benefit people like us. So, you know, part of, when we look at the Hawaii as a whole, we have to create that opportunities to grow leadership and to change that song that leaderships come from the outside. Leadership actually comes from the inside. And leadership has always been part of our families. We have never lost leadership. We don't call it leadership, and we don't even say, hi, I'm a leader. You know, there's a little cultural oddity there. But when you look at every family, there is that auntie that leads in a particular knowledge system, particular wisdom. There is that uncle that does this in a certain way. There is a person down the road that is a master in this. So, you know, we have not lost leadership. But what we want to do is we want to grow it. And we want to normalize leadership so that when our students come to the campus in search of their degrees, they're coming with an idea of how they're going to use that leadership, or how they're going to use that degree to advance their leadership. And so in the case of Miss Presley, who is probably stressing out right now, trying to load up her PowerPoint, I met her on a Mauna. I don't know who she was. There was like thousands of people on the Mauna. But there, one evening, they were gathering all the teachers, because there are a lot of instructors, professors, and cultural specialists. There were hundreds of them up on the mountain. So what she did was she organized an opportunity for them to share their knowledge systems. And there was the birth of what we call the Pu'uhuluhulu University. And so talk about leadership. How is Presley doing? So this—
I can share.
Oh, you ready? Okay, Makoko. Okay, Presley, that's it. You're on.
Okay. Sorry, my Zoom decided it was going to update itself. So, aloha nui mai kako o wau no Presley Keʻalaanuhea a Mook he kupa keʻia no Papakolea o Ahu. Aloha nui mai kako. Hi, my name is Presley Keʻalaanuhea a Mook, and mahalo for inviting me to share what little bits of myself I'm able to with you guys, and how that manifested itself within the Aloha Aina movements that we've presently seen throughout Mauna Kea. Okay, so because I was asked to share about my hua and who I am and where I come from, I wanted to start off with my formative years. Again, I'm from Papakolea on the island of Oahu, and for those of you who are unfamiliar, that is one of the first homesteads that were open throughout Hawaii. And I am a fourth generation who lived in that particular homestead that was originally awarded to my great-grandmother, Abigail Pua'oi. But I want to share a little bit about how I was raised, because it's going to be familiar to probably more than the majority of you who are here today. I was raised in Papakolea. I am the firstborn of my siblings. There's 4 of us. But I wasn't raised just in that immediate household where it was my mother, father, and my siblings. Like many other people throughout Hawaii, I was raised in the more extended family household. So Papakolea was my grandfather's house. It was passed down to him from his mother. And I was raised there with all of my cousins. So my dad has 5 siblings, and amongst the 5, there are 16 cousins. So there are a bunch of little kids running around. I think the year that I was born, out of the 5 siblings, 4 of them had children. So I grew up with a huge family. I was very fortunate being raised in Papakolea, because from a young age, my grandfather in particular, so just to give some background on them, my grandfather is Hawaiian, and he married a Piha British lady, an English woman from England, where he went there when he was in his 20s, and he came home with this 18-year-old wife, this full haole lady, and he brought her home to Papakolea, and that's how my dad and his siblings came to be. My grandfather kind of went against the norms. I think one of the stories that he shared when I was younger is that when he came home, his sister, very, very loud Hawaiian lady, my Auntie Joy, she said, "Who the hell is that?" And he said, "I married her, leave her alone." So there's lots of stories with that. Growing up, my grandma shared that it was a culture shock moving into Papakolea, because again, it is homestead, and there's stereotypes associated with Papakolea, but it's supposed to be like rugged-ish homestead. When I first came here to Hilo, I heard a saying about ho from Papakolea using pareos as curtains, and I was like, what? But that's like the stereotype with that. So my grandmother shared that when she first moved there, it was a huge culture shock, because she moved into my tutu's house, who Piha Hawaii, very Hawaiian lady, sang Hawaiian music, and she very blunt in your face. If you know older Hawaiian music, she went by the name of Naughty Abby and sang some interesting songs. But she was a very loud and loving Hawaiian woman. But one of the stories that my grandma shared about the culture shock was coming there and coming from England and trying to be a good housewife, And one of the first major mistakes she did was washed out the umeke with the spoiled poi. So I was raised by those two people, a very Hawaiian man who wanted to do whatever he wants to do, and then this British lady who's just trying to function in this completely foreign land. But my grandfather had a very soft spot in his heart for me because I was, okay, my grandfather's the eldest, my father's the eldest, I'm the eldest. And for a long time going back, I come from a very long line of hanaumua, so the eldest within families. So he kind of favored me a little bit when I was growing up. He would take me all over the place, and I was just this little kid that you see here in the PowerPoint following my grandfather around Papakolea, and he was a big nerd, and one of his favorite things to do was go to the archives. So from a young age, I was trained to be inquisitive and go out and try to research things and figure things out for myself. Outside of being myself, again, I was raised in Papakolea with all of my cousins, and my idea of ohana and being and just who I am, my family did a really good job at making sure I lived my childhood as a child. And one of the big things that they instilled with us is family and respect and understanding who you are, the place that you're in, and being able to kind of shift how you act in certain areas. So when I was trying to think of my childhood, all I can think about is being at the beach. So to give further background, being in Papakolea, my parents, they were a little bit younger when they had me. So they both had full-time jobs, and I was more so with my aunties, uncles, and of course my grandfather. But because all of us lived in Papakolea, we all went to school together at Pauoa Elementary School, which is right down the road. And that elementary school was nice because even though it wasn't Kaiapuni or immersion, there was a lot of Hawaiians there, and I felt a sense of belonging, and I had all of my cousins. But I don't remember school growing up, and that's because my family made it a big deal to take us out of school as frequently as possible, which is ironic because I'm going to talk about how education became my life. So you see this picture here, I shared it because one of the common things I share with people is that growing up, I didn't know that Friday was a school day. I thought Friday, Saturday, and Sunday was the weekends, and most Mondays as well. And that's because Fridays, every single cousin went to the beach, and that's how I was growing up. I was a daughter of a fisherman who was the son of this super nerd Hawaiian man who just cared about family. Which brings me to, I guess this would be where things start to shift. So growing up, I was kind of comfortable. I was in this realm of understanding. I'm around family. I know what's culturally acceptable. I know who I am. I enjoy life. And then I got accepted into Kamehameha schools where things start to shift a little bit. Going into Kamehameha, looking back on it, it wasn't difficult. I never want to say that it's difficult, but going into Kamehameha for me, even though people are like, oh, that's like a Hawaiian school, but not really a Hawaiian school, whatever. It wasn't about going to a Hawaiian school. My father decided to send me there because when he was in 7th grade, he got sent to Kamehameha, and for himself, he understood the value of if you already have a solid foundation, that this school is able to help you to navigate yourself or navigate your way through the realm that we're currently in here in Hawaii. So I ended up going to Kamehameha, and at that school, I had to figure out how to take things seriously, how to take my education seriously, how to focus. And even though, again, I shared that my grandfather would take me to places like the archives, for me, that was fun and time to spend with my grandfather. And I had to shift it because during the same time that I got into Kamehameha schools, my grandfather died. So I was in this new stage of my life where I was trying to figure out myself in a new arena and understand who I am. And this is kind of where I start to form myself in my education and understanding who I am within that academic realm. So I end up going to Kamehameha, I graduate, and immediately after graduation, most people go to school or get a job. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. All I knew was that at that school, they kind of tailored tailor the curriculum to do certain things. And one of the checklist items in order to graduate was that I needed to apply to a college. As a 17-year-old, I had no desire to go to college. I didn't know if I wanted to get a job. I didn't know anything. I just knew, okay, you're going to put me in certain situations. I know how to get by. I know how to do well in those situations. But I didn't have any idea of what I wanted to do after I graduated from high school. But they required us to apply to at least one college in order to graduate. So I only applied to one, and it was UH Manoa, and I got in. So since I got in and I don't really have a plan, I end up going to school some more. So I end up going to UH, and that's an entire story within itself. But while I was going to school as an undergrad, I went through different stages of my life where I was trying to figure out what was important, because like the common thing when you go to school is you got to figure out your life. You got to figure out what you're doing with this. You don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste your money. What are you doing? And I still didn't know. I got into school and I still didn't know. My first year of undergrad, I think I declared my major to be education with a focus in elementary ed, because that was a safe space for me. I was like, oh, I'm great with kids. I love family. I can teach children. That didn't last, of course, because you'll see with my upbringing, I didn't necessarily agree with everything within the College of Ed. And after my first year of college, if we reflect back just a tiny bit, I was raised with all of my cousins in Mōkaulele, which means they're essentially my siblings, right? At the summer after my first year of undergrad, my first cousin, Makamai, she was 15 years old. She passed away from alcohol poisoning. So while I was in school, I had this big shift of, okay, something big had just happened to me. I don't know what I'm going to do. Do I actually want to take school seriously? And after that, I decided I'm going to take school seriously, and I'm going to reflect on my life and what I want to do. And I started to reflect on my grandfather a lot that second year of undergrad. And I realized I had a passion for learning more about the things that he was teaching me as a young child. So as a young child, I was already learning how to go through the archives to look at genealogy. But I decided, okay, I want to try and do that beyond just my family. So I ended up eventually declaring a major in Hawaiian Studies. And by circumstance, I had the credits necessary to also, by my final semester, declare Hawaiian language. So I graduated with my bachelor's degrees in both Hawaiian Studies and Hawaiian language in 2012. Again, I didn't really know what I was doing. It was just kind of go with the flow. This is happening. I think this feels right. And that's kind of like how I did everything, how I still do everything. It felt right. I'm going to do it. After graduating with my bachelor's, I still didn't know exactly what I was going to do. Throughout undergraduate degree, I had to figure out my living situation. I had to figure out my expenses. So I used to work jobs while I was going to school. And I think by the time I graduated, I was juggling 3 jobs while going to school full time. And it was like just silly little jobs. When I graduated, I was working at the art gallery at campus. I was working at the Waikiki Aquarium, and I was working at a t-shirt place at Ala Moana. So I didn't fully feel like I was equipped to figure out what I was going to do with my life, which made me decide I'm going to go to school even further. And I applied to 3 programs upon graduating with my undergrad, Hawaiian language, Hawaiian studies. And at that time, I decided to try and see how I'd feel about education again. So I applied to a program called Ho'okulaiwi, which was trying to equip immersion teachers at the time. But I decided on Hawaiian language, and that's, I believe, one of the best decisions that I made in my life, because language was something that my grandfather stressed for me to learn from a young age. And I decided I didn't actually decide to fully embark on learning that until he passed away. So I ended up getting my master's in 2018. But throughout that time, immediately after graduating with my bachelor's, I started teaching within the university system as well. So I just have it listed. First time I taught was in 2012. I got hired as a graduate teaching assistant, which sometimes you see that title and you think, oh, well, she was helping a professor. In our department, no, the graduate teaching assistants take on their own classes. So from 2012 to 2015, I was teaching on average 2 classes per semester. And then I got hired as a lecturer, and I was fortunate enough to be given 4 classes a semester until 2018 when I finally graduated with my master's and I got a permanent position as an instructor at UH Manoa. But while that was happening, I understood that the university was only one space and I wanted to touch upon different areas as well. So I was a part-time teacher at, within the Kaiapuni schools. I did programs with things such as Nopua No'eau, and I've always taught summer school at Kamehameha, both at Kapalama and on Maui campus. And those are all different age groups because I wanted to make myself a little bit more rounded. And I guess during this time, this was a big time in my life because I started to realize that education, and in particularly Hawaiian history, language, political understanding, was what I was passionate about. And upon reflecting, it's because my existence has always been political. And that's something that I was taught being raised in Papakolea. I was privileged enough to be given something to be able to live in an area such as Hawaiian Homestead. So this time of my life was really important because I started to see the value of education and I was able to relate it to myself and things I learned within school. Okay. Hold on. Okay, which brings me to this craziness. This is just out of nowhere, right? So while I was in school and while I was teaching, I understood that I loved teaching. I loved learning more. I still love learning. I still love teaching. And I know that I always have more to learn. But I knew that I wanted to take things out of the safety of a school. Yeah, a physical space of school. So while I was going to school, I actually made a lot of friends. Some of you are on this call or on this Zoom. But someone that I got really close to while I was going through my master's program was Jenny Estrella. And I tend to make friends with people who are a little bit older than me in classes because it's comforting. Again, I was raised by my grandfather. So she's a little bit older than me. And while I was like 20 something, like 22 years old, she was a little bit older. She had 3 kids, a 4th on the way. And we were taking classes and we were theorizing about education and what we learned about the education system within Hawaii, and particularly through literacy movements and those types of things. And because she had children, she decided to trust in me to try and figure out curriculum to homeschool her children. During the time that I was going through my master's program, I created Halepili with my friend Jenny, where we started to create curriculum for her children, but we started giving that to the community. And that kind of is what bridges me from going to just myself and what I felt comfortable in my job to realizing I can do a little bit more. So through Halepili, we started to make workbooks, free worksheets. We did workshops with a lot of the immersion schools and some of the preschools throughout the island of Oahu and Maui. But Halepili was the first time I was able to be creative and to start to give back to the community through my educational ventures. Which brings me to the point of this, right? So Halepili was founded in 2014 in the midst of me going through school to get my master's. While I was getting my master's, I started the program in 2012 and it took me 6 whole years to graduate, which is a story within itself. But it took me a while, longer than I feel comfortable admitting sometimes. But during the time that I was going to grad school, the first, I guess, standoff in regards to the TMT issue happened in 2015. During that time, I just got hired as a lecturer, so I was teaching 4 classes, and I wasn't secure in my understanding, or I guess I didn't feel secure in my position and my standing within the university system as an educator and as a student. So in 2015, I did not come up to the mountain physically. So when 2019 comes around, it was a little bit different. I already graduated with my master's. I had a permanent position at the university, and the timing of when things were happening in regards to TMT was aligning crazy to what was happening in my personal life. So that summer of 2019, I was again teaching summer school at Kamehameha because I needed to get out of the college system. Sometimes I need to just take myself out of teaching the adults and go complete opposite. So that summer I was teaching incoming Papa Mala'o, or kindergarteners. So I was on Maui teaching a bunch of kindergarteners, and I started to get a bunch of text messages from professors and colleagues and friends at the university saying there's going to be movement on TMT and we have to figure out something we're going to do, which ironically, those are all University of Hawaii affiliates, so faculty members, staff, and students. I was getting a lot of those text messages while I was teaching on Maui. And one of the last texts I got while I was on Maui is, we are going to meet on, I believe the date was July 12th in the PM, and start to occupy that space on July 13th. Ironically, I finished summer school on Maui on July 12th. So there was a shift from 2015 where I had every excuse not to show up to the Mauna to I have no excuses, and the excuses that I had 4 years prior don't work anymore. So when my friend texted me, are you going to the Mauna? I responded to her, if they need me. And she very blatantly told me, you're going to go up to the Mauna. So I ended up going up to the Mauna on July 13th. Just because I knew that I wasn't able to in 2015, and my na'a was pulling me in the direction that you don't have a choice in this matter. Things are lining up, and if you ignore this, then you're ignoring very blatant ho'ailona. So I end up going up to the Mauna, which changes me drastically. When I first show up, coming from Oahu, of course, I wanted to take a back seat. I wanted to be helpful, but I wanted to take a back seat and let the people who are from this space, were already involved in the movement, to take the lead. So when I first showed up on July 13th, I did silly things, but they were big silly things. Like, if you guys were there on the first week of standoff, there are a bunch of signs and they're on cloths. Me and my friend Aubrey actually stapled all those signs together to the wood. I did stuff like that. I painted signs. I cleaned up. I was on phones and helping people like Kahele Duklo to order lua and storage units. I was trying to take a very backseat approach to support what was happening in the movement. And it worked for the first week. And then after the first week, as we all know, on that Wednesday, a large group of kupuna got arrested, which kind of ignited that fire within the Lahui, where people started showing up in mass. And I think the highest estimate of people that showed up was like close to 7,000 people showed up to the Mauna. So when we go from roughly 40 people to 7,000, I realize making signs and organizing over the phone is not enough. I need to grow as big as what just happened with the movement. And I just decided that it was going to be through education, because that's what I was focusing on. And that's what I tried to do with Halepili, and I had a chance. So that's where Pu'uhuluhulu University comes into play. On, I believe it was Saturday or Sunday, July 21st, I officially started what we called Pu'uhuluhulu University, an actual place of Hawaiian learning, which we can talk about later on where that came from. But we started that, and the way that it kind of started off was, there's a lot of people. If there's a lot of people, there's a lot of opportunity, but if there's idle time, then things that we don't want to happen can possibly happen. So what do we do with that idle time? How do we fill it? And at first we were going to just schedule classes, which shifted into a conference style of classes because there's not enough teachers for 7,000 people, to let's call it a university, to it's not one day, I'm going to do it every day for weeks on end, which is what happened. I ended up, with the help of the entire Lahui, offering classes for free up on Pu'uhuluhulu on Mauna Kea. And that ended up being my largest contribution to the movement in 2019 to 2020. And then, of course, I can talk about this when like there's questions or whatever, but you start to see how that brings back to everything that I was doing throughout my life. Bringing in the ohana, so within the classes, anyone could come to the classes. So you see every generation within a single class. You see different types of people teaching, but what the beauty about Pu'uhuluhulu University was that you saw everyone together, and it kind of reminded me of my childhood. But I think that's a good summary of, I guess, my ka'au, condensed summary of my ka'au, and I will leave it for questions if that's okay. I think you are muted. Still muted.
Yeah, that would be good. That's what my kids say. Keep them muted. Well, thank you for preparing this presentation and making it very, very clear of your journey. And I think what is resonating is sometimes when we build leadership, people think we have to have all of our essentials in place and line, and all the goals set up, and it's a sequence of events. I have not met a leader that was born with all of the essentials in place. Oftentimes, a relationship, and that's why I put in the chat, I want to now begin to look at the role grandparents have on their grandchildren and the leadership the grandchild develops. Because oftentimes it doesn't come from the parents, it may come from the grandparents or somebody else in the community. Looking at trauma, the death of your cousin was cold water on reality that, even when you're young, you're 15 years old, you think people are going to live forever. And to know that somebody at age 15 has passed away so close to you, that is a big jolt. And then in your turning times, your grandfather passes, a few years later, your grandfather passes. And so, there's this passing. And so there's this reality, cold water is thrown upon us in these moments of trauma. We become very sober to reality. And sometimes we run into fantasy, and then sometimes we become very, very real, and we have to do something about it. But I like the fact that you said you didn't always know, and you had to try things out. Now, those of you in this audience, I want you to begin to think about this. How does this reflect you? How many of you were reared by your grandparents or someone of that generation? How did that affect you? How did you take trauma, real trauma, and create advancement? The trauma becoming a tool to advance, to drive, the gasoline that pushes your car forward, versus remaining in the realm of victimization and stillness and isolation. So let's talk about those things. I like the fact that you said, your insecurity in 2015, you're not in a secure space, and because the university's initiative was to grow TMT, and you as a member of the university, freshly, not so secure yet employment wise, you had to make a decision, and it was a decision that kept you feeling guilty. So then in 2019 came and things just fell in place. You're a little bit more secure, and you says, no, I'm there. And then you went from stapling to making signs, calling for the luas. And before you know it, the kupuna are arrested, 7,000 people on the Mauna, and you had to contribute bigger. You had to come from backseat to front performer, from a support to now a leader. So those are those things that are very, very important to us. So I want you to begin, those of you in this participants, participants here, I want you to begin to ask questions or grow the conversation. How is this similar to you? What did you not understand? Or if you have any questions on how she's taken certain elements of her life. She said something when she was tired of teaching
the elderly, she had to go teach the kids. So she sort of knew that your community and the community that you're in affects how you think of yourself and what you do. And so how does that play in leadership? Okay, can we get some questions happening here? You just have to unmute yourself and you can go straight to it. First of you, how many of you in this group were on the Mauna? In the chat, can you just raise your hand or whatever, or raise your hand right there in your reactions. How many of you were on the Mauna, or whether, okay, great. Let's look at this. Righty. Okay. How many of you experienced pu'uhuluhulu? Had an opportunity to get educated on a Mauna? Yeah. Okie dokie. Now, what are some of the how is some of your storyline align with what Presley is saying? Just go for it. Ask those questions. I'm interested to know your story in short. So you don't want to take the whole time, but share with us what resonated of Presley's story with you, as a parent, perhaps as a teacher.
Aloha. Can I share?
Yes, Keanu.
Aloha, o Keanu, kalamai. I'm still at Hana, but if you see my after work look, I'll go turn my camera on. Aloha. I just wanted to mahalo kumu keala, who will always be one of my kumu and somebody that I look to. I'm now teaching in the DOE. Oh my God. And one of the things I learned from kumu keala when I was one of her haumana was, she taught us, she never give us an F. What is an F gonna do? Yeah, how does she get us to this place of understanding? She never wanted to fail us. And so I kind of take some of that thought process too when I'm working with these haumana in a high school. I'm like, how do I get you to where you need to be? I don't want to fail you. How do we have these conversations? But I was lucky to have her as my kumu. And then same thing, very similar, when Mauna Kea movement first happened in 2015, I didn't know who I was. I was still trying to find myself, my cultural identity. And so I didn't have a voice. I didn't have an understanding of what is this Mauna Kea, what's happening? How do I fit in as a Kanaka, as a citizen, somebody who really wants to be a part of the Lahui and to Kako'o. And then 2019 hit, just so happened I was working part-time, I was full-time student part-time, and going to the Mauna and kumu keala, we were tent mates, not tent mates, but our tents are next to each other. So, but having the opportunity to be a part of that and experience that side of her and her drive and her love for education. I used to teach infant toddlers. I've moved on to elementary, and now I'm in high school because I want to continually grow in my understanding and of who I am. And I cannot be stagnant, because when we stay in one place, that's not growth and it's not living. But that's kind of what I get whenever I see Keala, or this Mo'olelo that she shared about her life story. And again, just mahalo. I just wanted to, you are one of my kumu. You're just always gonna be my kumu. Okay, mahalo.
Interesting. The question is, why are we giving our students Fs? Presley, what's your reasoning? What's your reasoning, your rationale behind that question? And why is one of your students saying that was a standout feature, and now that feature of her experience with you is now going to affect her experience with other students? Why are we giving students F? Can you speak to that?
It's so funny because I don't think I've ever recognized that I've said that out loud. And I guess I've been teaching online for a few years now. So reflecting on being able to teach in person, I don't know if I ever said straight up, like, I don't want to give you an F. I don't believe in giving Fs, but I always encourage my students that you need to understand that you're knowledgeable, that you're worthy of whatever other education you want to take on. And don't sell yourself short, and don't act like you're worthy of an F, because no one's worthy of an F. Everyone's worthy of the A. I think I've said that every student who comes through my class should be leaving with an A, because just some background, I teach at the university at Manoa, but I'm in the Hawaiian language department, but the primary class that I've been focused on is the Hawaiian 100 course, which doesn't necessarily teach the language, but it teaches the political, social, the historical context of language here in Hawaii, and how other cultures have affected Hawaii, how we have similarities throughout the globe. And one of my main driving points in my class is that everyone has something to share, and I'm going to learn something from every single one of my students. So all I really require of you is to be willing to learn from me and your classmates, and to share and teach us along the way. So I don't know.
Presley, where did you learn that from? Because, no, I can count the F's I got in school, on one hand, maybe just two fingers. And, but, for some reason, that's the norm. You have 5 grades to grade your performance. And so where did you learn that F's should not be an option? How, not to give the option for students to fail, but to give every reason for students to succeed. Where did you learn that in your rearing?
I think I guess when I say that, sometimes I share that I was spoiled growing up, and I wasn't spoiled with material possessions, but I was spoiled with people actually paying attention to me, my family, and just trying to teach me that you are worthy, you are smart, you have things to share with the world, be yourself and never try to change. But in regards to letter grades, I think I learned that when I was going through school. So at Kamehameha, of course, everything is a freaking who's the best of the best of the best of the best. And that was kind of draining for me, because I never came from a place where you're challenging yourself against other people and comparing yourself to your classmates or that person or that person. And am I good enough? Am I fast enough? Do I sing well enough? Do I speak well enough? And I had to learn how to challenge myself when I went to that school. And I think I learned it a little bit too well when I went through that school and by the time I graduated, because once I got to college, even though I didn't know that I wanted to go to college or what I was doing, my end goal was always I need to finish this semester with a 4.0. And I used to do this really weird thing. I'm still weird, but I was very weird when I was younger. And I would, on the first day of class, when we have to introduce ourselves, I would always introduce my name, where I'm from, and then I'd say, and I'm an A student, because I needed my teachers to know that I'm going to get an A in the class, and I'm going to convince you from the second you meet me that you're going to give me an A. And I did it every single class, every single semester. And it wasn't until I think one of my last classes of my undergraduate career, Liana Wong, if you've ever met him, he's very sassy. And he always challenged me. But one day he said, "Why is that a thing? Why are you caring about your A? Are you learning something? Or are you just collecting A's?" And I think after that, and after he always made an example out of me in class, especially if I messed up grammar-wise. But after he used that example, and he's like, "Why? What you gonna do with all these A's? Are you actually learning something?" It made me step away from what made me think that the A's are what makes me worthy or smart. And where did I learn that? And I had to reflect. So once I got into grad school, which is ironically the same time I started teaching, that lesson was fresh. And I don't think it ever left me.
Amazing. Yeah. So one those one sentence phrases. Yeah. The teacher can go real deep. What are you learning? Or are you just collecting A's? How profound that of a question that is. So, even though he may have irritated you that very, very moment, you got to send him a thank you card saying, thank you for contributing a trauma that gave me reason to look deeper. Now, your student also, Keanu also talked about voice. She didn't have a voice. She didn't have an identity. How do you think your journey as manifested on Pu'uhuluhulu or in Halepili or in your classes, how do you grow the capacity for your learners, those that experience you? How do you grow their voice, their capacity for them to create their voice, hear themselves, and to assess themselves as they move forward?
I think one thing that I very blatantly say all the time is that everyone is an educator. Everyone has unique knowledge to themselves. So in my class, you cannot be quiet. A big thing is everyone's going to share something, and there's no right or wrong in my class ever. There's no right or wrong. It's you share, you're bringing something, and we can all learn from that. Whether you want to believe it or not, you're going to learn from the person who's talking bubbles. You're going to learn a lesson from them. And I think with Halepili, when we first created it, the children are really young. They're all under the age of 10. And we were creating curriculum for them based off of what they were interested in. So we did things on just Aumakua. We did the Kumulipo a million times because Alora, Jenny's oldest, was so into the Kumulipo forever. I think she still is. Just based off of what they're interested in. And then now that it's been almost 10 years since we created that, me and Jenny have kind of let go of Halepili, and the kids took it on. So Alora is now, I think, I don't know how old she is. She's in high school. But she's having the lead where she's starting to create these books, and her young cousins who are like 7 and 8 years old they just wrote a book on 1779 and Captain Cook. So we're letting them take the lead on that. And it was always about the kids. And then when it comes to like Pu'uhuluhulu University, if you were on the Mauna, it seems very beautiful and you see all the big classes and the crowds and everything. But there were days where I was so exhausted because I couldn't find people that were willing to teach because people didn't believe in themselves and that they're capable or ready to teach a class. So I had to, I started to beg people at one point, which I don't think a lot of people know, but I would beg people so hard that one time I cried on the ala after AHA, which is a funny story that people bring up sometimes. But it's because I had to convince a lot of people, and I went through that too, convincing yourself that you're worthy of teaching other people or you have something to share. And it wasn't until I was just like, no, I'm just going to assign people and I'm going to make Uncle Keeny, who we don't know what he's talking about, but he just tells me, oh, he's going to be like, and I'm like, okay, that's what you're teaching. Yes. Mōkaulele with Uncle Keeny. Okay, well, some kids from Navahi are here. I want you guys to teach the song, teach a chant, or going up to former students like Keanu. I probably forced her to teach a class, but I went up to my former students and I'm like, no, you've learned lessons in my class. You're going to go and teach that to the Lahui now. But yeah, always recognizing and appreciating that everyone is an educator and just shifting that, because everyone has something to teach me. Yeah. Every single person that I've come in contact with.
So that's that shift of thinking, in leaders. That leadership is not a degree you get and a certificate that you get, and there's something else. I think, and also leadership is knowing that when you see other people, you see leadership in them. I have met some so-called leaders where they want to be the only leaders in the room, and like, oh, okay, this is going to be a very short conversation here, and then some leaders where everybody's contributing, and part of leadership is sometimes stepping so way back and pushing people forward, making that opportunity. And when they don't believe in themselves, believe in them, because sometimes that's all they need is somebody to believe in them. And how many of us didn't see ourselves as leaders, but somebody believed in us and pushed us forward, and then gave us a taste of hearing our own voice. Oh my goodness. I mean, I have something to contribute. We have a hand up. Elizabeth Shaver, is that hand still active? It went lethargic. It's okay. Not a problem. I do have a question in the chat. Ovia says, somebody says, can you share about one of the Pu'uhuluhulu University experiences that were a wow moment for you?
Almost all of them. It was all just, sometimes I'm like, did I make this up? Did this happen? That was me? That's weird. I would never do that. But everything was kind of a wow moment. But I want to say one of my favorite days was the day that the students from Nawahi came up and they took over the university. Because it was literally the whole school. And we just let the kids teach all day. And it was so cute seeing the kupuna walking into their class and learning from like these 7-year-olds how to do hey or whatever they were teaching. That was one of my favorite days. Some of the other wow moments were seeing my students finally just cave in and going to teach. And then, I think in regards to that was just seeing the types of people teaching, seeing an entire family sit in a class. The first like month or so, I tried to make it a thing where every hour I had an Olalo Hawaii class, because I feel like everyone in Hawaii should have the means to learn how to speak Hawaiian if they want to. And that can be hard sometimes. So I was trying to make it so that every hour I had a Hawaiian class, and sometimes I would teach every single hour. But it was one of the wow moments was just seeing the family decide to sit there all day and learn the language together. And you have like the kids who kind of got it because they took some classes before, to the parents who absolutely are just like lost. And I don't know, I liked seeing the family, and I think it's because that's the familiar for me, seeing everybody together.
And I know you can speak to this, but there were in between ceremonies. So when I went up to the Mauna, I was very specific what my contribution is going to be. Because when you have 5,000 and now you're telling me 7,000 people, that freaks me out. There's a lot. I knew exactly what my parameters. And so I had a ritual map. So my job, my contribution to the movement was the ritual piece, the receiving of the gifts, the welcoming of people, and using hula as that. So I was very, very comfortable there. And in between, and I only went for that to contribute the ritual. And then in between the rituals, the morning, the noon, and the evening, I would sit at my car and do knots. And, as a way of keeping focus. But there were families, young families, old families. And one of the, I remember this one moment that's reflective of many moments, when this young father came with his children were all in grade school, with his young Hawaiian family, beautiful family. And he says, I taught my children that it was enough to be Hawaiian, that, just being blooded Hawaiian was enough. And I believe that. But now I realize that for now, that's not enough for me and my family. We need to know what that means. To have blood is one, but now to understand the practices and to learn the language and to all of these would help. And so he began to take, it got him to rethink himself. He's taught his kids to be, Hawaiian and humble and no question, you're Hawaiian all your life and be kind and all of these things. But then the university provided a larger scope of what could even advance further their inherited legacy. And I saw young families, and it's not an easy thing to say that maybe my decision was wrong. Maybe I neglected this part of my family's development. So it was a big thing for the father to say, I have to up the par here. And we have to learn. That's the beautiful thing about Pu'uhuluhulu. People were learning as families. And generations helped out generations. And then you have the old tutu man coming, he all miho ole, and says, oh, yeah. I thought I knew everything, but this young one's there. All kind of new stuff. We never learned this when we were young. So, and nobody had to worry about a grade. People just came and learned what was relevant to them. I have a question here. It says, Keala, he says, I would love to hear your manao on conceptualizing Pu'uhuluhulu University in terms of knowledge sharing that serves a purpose quite different from that of Western academic structures. Knowledge from the Lahui for the Lahui. How did that crystallize?
Okay. Nice question. Thank you, Amy Stillman. Hi. So maybe I can give a little bit of background of how we came up with the idea of Pu'uhuluhulu University, because I kind of glossed over that. So rewind. That weekend that I went up, I showed up on the 13th, but on the 14th was the day that Pua Kesma and Lanakila did the ceremony on the hour, leading up to what we knew was going to happen on that Monday with the machinery trying to come up. So on that day with the ceremony on the hour, in between those hours, we actually held some, just classes, some regular things. Like you see in normal types of, when there's political movements, you have like classes where you sit in and you talk about things and strategize. We had those things, and I think I have a picture somewhere in my archives of this board that me and my friend Aubrey, again, writing the boards, painting things, listed a bunch of classes just to give some historical context of what was happening on the Mauna. And then when the 1,000 showed up, Ilima Long was like, you guys should do more of those classes. And I was like, oh, bossing me around. But no, it was good. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I can do these classes again. But it went from that weekend. Remember, I was convinced to go up there because of my colleagues from the university, which is ironic, right? We're going to talk about how crazy that is, that a bunch of University of Hawaii workers are the ones who are up there. A lot of my colleagues from the university were there, and it was easy for me to ask them, hey, can you do this class? Can you talk about this? Because I know what you're talking about too. There's thousands of people. I know some of these people. I can recognize them. But who the heck am I? They don't know who I am. I'm Maha'oi if I'm coming up to you and I'm like, hey, I need you to teach a class for me. They're like, for what? I'm like, for something that I'm trying without any permission from the kupuna. That's basically what it was. So I actually had to humble myself, take my thinking out, and just literally go up to people and do something that I would never do, and be that Maha'oi thing and say, hi, I am Presley and I have an idea. And I just want to offer some educational classes for the Lahui. And I think I'm going to do a bunch of classes tomorrow. And that's what I was calling it, classes. Would you be willing to? And I was doing that. And then I thought, okay, well, if we do it conference kind of style, we can have 4 or 5 classes at a time every hour, so people can pick and choose and it won't be too much. And that's what I had scheduled for the first day. And then I was talking to one of my friends from UH Manoa, who's a PhD candidate in, I believe, the political science program, Kahala Johnson. And he jokingly said, you should call it Pu'uhuluhulu University, an actual Hawaiian place of learning. And I was like, Kahala. He's like, no, do it. It's so funny. It's so funny. And I was just, there's too much going on. And I said, yeah, sounds good. And I don't know who made it, but a bunch of people made signs on scrap pieces of wood and cardboard and wrote Pu'uhuluhulu University, an actual Hawaiian place of learning. And I was like, oh my God, my face and name is attached to that. I work for UH. But I think the good thing with that was it made us as educators within the university system, but also the university system peoples who weren't there, start to think about, why are they saying something so sassy like that? What does that mean, an actual Hawaiian place of learning? And that kind of sparked a conversation. So that's where the name came to be. It was not me, it was Kahala Johnson and someone who decided to make signs. And I just decided, you know what, people like it, it's sticking, it's good. But yeah, so to bring that different structure, the knowledge from the Lahui for the Lahui. When I was doing research for my master's thesis and, just in general for my classes and teaching, I've learned, again, one thing that really, it piqued my interest going through school was that literacy movement within the Hawaiian Kingdom. Yeah, going from 0% literacy because we have a verbal language, and that's just is what it is, to having one of the highest literacy rates in the world within like a decade. That's freaking bizarre to me. And I used to research on how that came to be. How did they figure out the literacy percentage? Like, how do you know if someone's literate versus not? And a really good paper I read was by John Keʻalaanuhea, and he outlines that and uses some of the missionary archives to talk about how they tested Hawaiians. And one thing that he shares in his paper is that Hawaiians came and took these literacy tests, and they did it completely voluntarily. And it's because, very Hawaiian thing, I want to prove that I'm great. Look, if I can do it, I'm going to show you that I can do it. And I thought that was beautiful, just showing up in mass. And there weren't like schoolhouses, so it was like, I think there's a few like drawing or depictions of what happened, but it's just like in an open field where there's just people there like eager to be like, look at what I learned. So when I was trying to figure out where is this classes that I didn't know where the classes were going to be either. I woke up at 6:00 in the morning and realized I scheduled all these classes, but I don't know where the heck it's going to be. And the only empty space was that paw by the ahu. And I was like, is this appropriate? It's kind of far away. And I just decided I was going to go there. But when I went there and I put these cardboard signs out, or the young students did, it reminded me of those pictures and that paper that I read. And I just kept on going with it. Because it was, again, old but new, and making the things that happened in the past like current now.
So you bring up an interesting piece of leadership that I need to commit more time to turning the thought into some kind of curriculum. But it is the fact that, and when we grew up, we heard this word waha. Waha was not when somebody called you waha, that was a really bad thing. And it usually ended up in some kind of swings, blows were given when somebody called you waha. And sometimes the families will get involved because the waha means mouth. And it's a really, really bad thing to be called, oh, you all mouth. Oh, waha, that's how they say, waha. And, these days it means, oh, you all mouth. And what that came about is when they use that term is when they question, do you have working evidence? Can you actually prove what you're saying? So if you're saying you're this, can you actually do it? And so, growing up, and I grew up in the 60s in Ko'olaupoko, 60s and the 70s, it was still very much alive, that practice of, if you're going to say you're going to do this, you better do them. Or if you say you can do them, what's your proof? We're always like, what the proof? Proof, I like proof. So we use this real sassy pigeon thinking, but it comes from a very old Hawaiian, it's called the ho'oia. You have to have the capacity to demonstrate your capability, especially if, competition, oh my, you want to get Hawaiians to ignite, make a competition, because as soon as you question, as soon as you open up competition, people need to come and ho'oia their levels of understanding and learning. Lay people, they gotta ho'oia. To be a lay maker, we want to see proof you're a lay maker. You want a hula teacher, we need to see proof you're a hula teacher. How to be a hula teacher, you don't have to dance. And so I like that fact that you bring up that when the opportunity came up for the Kanaka to demonstrate their literacy, it was their time to ho'oia. It wasn't the time, and it was a proud moment. I'm going to demonstrate that I'm not all waha, that this is the proof that this is a good thing. So, how do we get that back in? Because we've been convinced over the years not to demonstrate your strength. Be humble about it. Don't always show. But when you need the emu person, it's not a time to act like you don't know how when you know how. Yeah. When we need, so that the idea of ho'oia, and we have this ho'ike. We use ho'ike all the time in academia now. We've incorporated ho'ike. And some people call ho'ike the final, when you demonstrate your learning through the final. For us in many colleges and programs, the ho'ike is when the community comes to bear witness to your learning. Gara ho'oia. You have to show your learning. You have to demonstrate your learning, because otherwise it doesn't get certified. If the learning is some personal thing, some personal experience, and the community cannot verify it, it's worthless to the community. So even in uniki, when we look at the uniki hula, and depending on the halal, but you always have a community to bear witness, the ho'oia, so they say, yeah, I was there. There's evidence that baga is what he's saying he is. So, this ho'oia is, thank you for bringing that up, because that is one of the hardest things, especially when we deal with students from rural, remote areas. They still have this shyness. When you take them outside of their normal space, their home, their community, and put them into academia, it's already foreign to them. So for them to demonstrate their knowledge systems in a foreign place, it's very, very difficult. So how do we indigenize the campus so that it is not foreign? Why are our campuses foreign in the first place? Why are campuses foreign places? So, to create a Hawaiian place of learning, to create an actual Hawaiian place of learning, ambiance has a lot to do with how people ho'oia. Yeah. So, people sitting in this group here, think about it. How many times we were given the opportunity and we backed out of it because we were conditioned to think that humility is not a way of showing. We don't show. We don't want to. It's that's too there's another word for that. That just slipped me. When you're just showing. But to ho'oia is different. Ho'oio is when they say, you just, you saw ho'oio, you're just showing for the wrong purpose. Yeah. But the ho'oia was when you give proof. You give proof of your learning. And in the ho'oia, you honor your teachers. In the ho'oia, you honor your teacher's teacher. So it's not about you. It's about the knowledge system that Amy's asked about that's coming down. That's the ho'oia. Each of us have an opportunity to carry this knowledge system forward, and we have to show proof of it as we move along the timeline, as this knowledge evolves along the timeline. So thank you for bringing that up, because we have to, our students come with huge potential, and perhaps the environment is not conducive for them to ho'oia, to show proof of their knowledge, because it's a foreign environment. So we have to begin to indigenize it. Okay. Any other questions do we have here? Okay. It is now 6:13. Let me put this on gallery view. So it is now 6:13. If any of you have any further questions you would like to ask Presley or of ourselves here, the work that we do in the university, this is the time. If you're shy, because this is not I see Frank. From Kako. There are some questions over here. Okay. Okie dokie.
Hi, Papa.
Hi, Papa. Who's the Ovaikela?
Kauahi.
Hi, Kawahi. Aloha. Mahia oi. Let me see you. Oh, where are you, Kawahi? That's my mo'opuna. Yeah, okay. Hi.
Uluae.
Hi, Uluae. Okay, dokie. Is Pu'uhululu University alive today? Now that you actualize it through TMT, have you thought of extending it to the wider community of Kanaka?
Okay, I always get this question. And I think the best way that I answered it is it's called Pu'uhuluhulu University for a reason. That's the place, that's the space, that's the time. and it was necessary during that time. It served its purpose. Right now, are there people at Pu'uhuluhulu that it needs a university? No. But I think what it did do is it set precedents, and it reawakened that, well, I hope it did, that understanding within our communities throughout the entire Pai'aina, that if you want something to happen, just do it. Just do it. There's no reason to stop yourself, yeah? And people have asked me, okay, well, the Mauna kind of, I guess the standoff or being on the Mauna from 2019 to 2020, it ended kind of abruptly because of COVID, right? If the reason why we're up there is to make sure that TMT is not being built, but there's really nothing that's going to be happening because there's a worldwide pandemic. And as like just people here in Hawaii, we have the reason why the masses showed up was because the kupuna were getting arrested, right? So we care about our kupuna. We gotta leave. We gotta make sure that we're taking care of them a little bit more. So it was kind of abrupt, right? We had to leave, which made it so that there wasn't like a formal closing or panina of, okay, well, you know, we're gonna put this to rest and let's say aloha to this and mahalo what happened. But the way that I answer the question is it served in its space and time, and I think that people learned from it. You see a lot of community engagement happening. A lot of the people who helped at Pu'uhuluhulu are doing things such as Kanai Okana, like still just going for it. After Pu'uhuluhulu was established, you saw other communities start to create their own quote unquote universities. We had Hunana Niho when there was the Aloha Aina stuff going down there with the Iwi Kupuna. They decided to create their own Hunana Niho University. In Kahuku with the windmills, they started to, like, people were just messaging me like, how do you create the university? I'm like, you just do it. You just offer classes and call it what it is. Because who's to tell you what's a university? What's education? What is this? It's all just theory. Let's just do something, do praxis, make something happen, teach people. So yeah, I think that's what's happening with it today. Is it's alive in different ways, in different manifestations. Yeah. But yeah.
So the ha'ina, if you know that ha'ina is, you know, when we do a lot of our songs, our modern songs, they end with the last verse ha'ina, and it echoes the important message that the composer wants the listener to hear. And so the ha'ina in this case is, Presley, how do we start this? You know, how do we start a university in this case? And you said just start it and call it what you need to. And, you know, just start it. You know, there was the maha'oi issue is a big, it's a big thing because we don't want to be maha'oi. So sometimes it's really difficult to ask for someone to contribute, especially if you don't know who they are. And so, but, you know, we have to relook at maha'oi, you know, because if we continue to use the current definition of maha'oi, it's going to be really difficult for us to move forward. So I have to teach my students, if you're Hawaiian and what you're doing is you're trying to promote Hawaii, I mean, you know, there's a way to ask, there's a time to ask, there's a tone by which you ask, you make a request. So you got to know the culture of asking. Yeah. But is that maha'oi or not? Because, you know, hula people, we continuously ask other hula people to help our students learn this, or for us to learn that, or for us to contribute. The hula people and is that called maha'oi? Maha'oi is sometimes the timing, the wrong tone, the wrong posture. That's maha'oi. When you don't have the culture, you're not sophisticated in how to ask. But, you know, so the asking for help doesn't go against things Hawaiian. It's very, very Hawaiian. It's the tone that we use. So that sometimes make it a little bit foreign and irritating to the ears. But, you know, so the ha'ina, just go for it. You know, look at, you know, if I can invite you all to look at your childhood like Presley does and evaluate that, because how we think today and what we do today, believe it or not, really is formed when we're young. Whether we come from happy homes or sad homes or you know, whatever, everything in between. So, you know, lucky if we come from a very supportive home. But some of the leaders we have today came from derelict homes, abuse, abandonment, and they still had the ability to turn that around and create advancement for themselves and their community. Many of our leaders in our community in the drug abuse systems were one-time drug users themselves that assimilate that, you know, kind of they just turned it around and now become, you know, they become the healers of that. So, you know, let's find, that's what Mōkaulele is about. Don't lose, make opportunity to lead, grow leadership, but you got to grow it from ourselves. And so, Presley, thank you for sharing your story, because it's very, very clear that even though during those confusing years, you know, you didn't know what you want to do, and you had your essentials were in place, and your grandfather and your father and your Papakolea community prepared you to ask the right questions, to challenge yourselves. And then you came across those teachers that ask you, you know, of the quality of your, is it quantity or quality of your experience? You know, all these challenges. The fact that you didn't want to just perform within the institution, but you wanted to test yourself to see, could you perform in creating curricula outside of the institution? And now those students are now becoming teachers. So you've given them a model to grow, and, you know, and to experience and to grow their own voice and hear themselves and make the mistakes in safe places so that they can grow from it. Pu'uhuluhulu, the physical space might be sleeping right now, but like in any heiau, we put the heiau to sleep when we don't need it. And then when we need it, we wake the heiau up. So pu'uhuluhulu can come at attention anytime, whether it's on the mauna or it has another name, like Haumea. She has many, many names. She represents many different places. But there's a ripple effect. That little kid, I remember on the mauna, that was talking to his dad and his mom. They were just this young nuclear family, cute nuclear family. You know, that went and they spent the day all sunburned at Pu'uhuluhulu University. I do believe that one day that kid is going to come up to us in 20 years and say, I was on a mauna. And that kid is going to be a leader in our community. So Pu'uhuluhulu, you know, cannot be pau, because it triggered something that is everlasting. So we didn't have to read about it; we could experience it. So I want to thank you. I want to thank your kupuna for choosing to create you and sustain you the way you are. I want to thank the haulelere that came to Papakolea that that survived. Survive that, because, you know, many of us are mixed, so we have to begin to figure out how we're going to survive in different situations, you know. Now, in closing remarks, I want to say mahalo. Next week, I think it's next week, we have, interestingly, Mōkaulele, we have 4 presenters this semester. They're all women, and they all hold degrees from the University of Hawaii, and then further degrees from other institutions. So interesting, because the University of Hawaii is committed to Indigenous leadership. And then 3 of the presenters will be speaking about leadership, the demonstration, the ho'oia of leadership on the mauna against an initiative supported by the university. So isn't that an interesting conflict? We grow leadership, and then yet we engage in tension. You know, I'm speaking of the institution. And, you know, it's like, okay, well, here it is. We are very familiar with that. And that ability to come together, use our traditional wisdoms, use our academic, you know, literacies, bring all of it together, constellate it all for the betterment of our Indigenous Hawaii, however we defined it. For some people, that means just a family. For some people, it means food sovereignty. For some people, it means the mauna, it means the ocean. However you define it, let's grow leaders. Let's grow leaders. Look at our children, and maybe, can I encourage you to help them see their potential and not reflect their weakness. We all have them. Weaknesses don't get us anywhere unless we plan to do something about it. So let's not give reason to give our own children Fs. Let's create opportunity for them to be A performers, front row performers. Yeah, time and place appropriate, of course. I want to mahalo the Kipuka, the Native Hawaiian Student Success Center of the UH Hilo, and then Iola Halo of Hawaii Community College. These are the two programs that are hosting this coming together. Oh, next week is Kekui Keʻalii Kanakaʻole. She's going to be talking about leadership, her whole oya of leadership on the Mauna as it relates to ritual for 5,000 people. What of her childhood kicked in that very moment when she looked up and there were thousands of people and only a small percent were the disciplined hula community that she's familiar with. She was looking at a lahui that was ready to learn something, to a chant and a dance. And what did she have to do to at that point, because it kind of, she had a say on it, to actually expand the participation to include everyone. So we're going to be listening to her, how she takes her life, her rearing with her grandmother onto the mountain, and how she contributes to a movement. How does she ho'oya her leadership? And therefore, what is she doing with her grandchildren? How does she teach her grandchildren to stand when it's time to stand and lead and ho'oya that way, and not just be waha? Okay, so mahalo anui. If you have any other questions you would like to have with Keʻalaanuhea, her email is in the chat. My email, you can reach me, is taupodi@hawaii.edu. I see you next week, guys. Spread the word. We have to give birth to our leaders. We cannot expect the outside world to give birth to our leaders. That's our kuleana. Whether it's the babies are coming from our bodies or the babies come from other people's bodies and we contribute to their fostering. Let's foster a healthy Hawaii. Ahui ho no kako. Keala, can you stay online, please, with Gail and our assistant? Bye-bye, everybody. Amy Stillman, I see more of you these days. I mahalo Zoom.